The Great Hall of Prime had stood for 3,000 years. Its walls were decorated with the bones of conquered species, trophies from 100 worlds that had fallen before the might of the Apex Conclave. Today, the hall was filled with the most dangerous creatures in the known galaxy, and they were celebrating another successful hunt. Commander Vex stood at the center of the gathering, his 7-foot frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. His scales were dark green, almost black, and his venomous fangs dripped with anticipation as he listened to the reports coming from the scout ships. The warlord had led more hunting expeditions than any living predator, and his reputation was known across every star system that mattered. High Predator watched from his throne of carved bone. The Ancient was the oldest member of the conclave, his 4 arms folded across his chest as his thermal-sensing eyes studied the assembly. He had seen species rise and fall, had watched entire civilizations crumble before the hunting fleets. Nothing in the galaxy surprised him anymore. The scout commander, a young named, approached the center of the hall with a data tablet in his clawed hands. His voice echoed through the chamber as he delivered his report. They had found a new species in the outer arm of the galaxy, in a region that had never been explored. The species called themselves humans, and they came from a small blue world called Earth. Leaned forward with interest. New species meant new hunts, new trophies, new glory. He demanded to know everything about these humans. Displayed the images on the great screen above the hall. The assembled predators saw soft, pink creatures with no scales, no claws, no fangs, and no natural armor. They walked on 2 legs and had flat, blunt teeth meant for eating plants. Their eyes faced forward like predators, but everything else about them screamed prey. The data showed that they had moderate gravity, comfortable temperatures, and abundant water. It was a paradise world, the kind that produced weak species. Laughter rippled through the hall. A commander made a joke about how these humans would make poor trophies because their skulls were too soft to mount on walls. A hunter suggested they might be useful as food stock, nothing more. Silenced them with a raised claw. He wanted more information. Where were these humans now? How far had they spread from there? Explained that the humans had established several colonies in nearby star systems. The closest was a mining outpost called New Montana, located just 3 cycles of travel from Prime. The colony had a population of 12,000 humans and was defended by a small military garrison. According to all assessments, it would fall within hours of a proper assault. High Predator finally spoke. His voice was like grinding stone, deep and ancient. He reminded the assembly that every species they had encountered had been classified before the hunt. Prey species ran and hid. Competitor species fought but could be overwhelmed. Apex species were rare but could be respected and negotiated with. These humans appeared to be none of these things. They were simply prey, the weakest kind. Stepped forward and volunteered to lead the hunting fleet himself. He would take 5 warships and 200 of his finest hunters. They would descend upon New Montana, capture specimens for study, and demonstrate to these humans what happened to prey species that wandered into predator territory. It would be a simple hunt, barely worth his time, but it would establish dominance and open this new region of space for future expansion. Granted his approval. The assembled predators cheered and roared, their hunting cries echoing through the ancient hall. Felt the familiar excitement building in his chest. There was nothing quite like the thrill of a new hunt, even if the prey was weak. The hunting fleet departed Prime the following morning. 5 warships cut through the darkness of space, their hulls decorated with the marks of 100 victories. Stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars stream past as they traveled toward human space. His second-in-command, a veteran named, approached with tactical assessments. The human colony had minimal defenses. Their ships were slower than vessels, and their weapons were primitive by conclave standards. The garrison numbered perhaps 200 soldiers, armed with projectile weapons and simple energy rifles. It would be like hunting blind cave creatures, said. They would not even see the claws coming. Agreed, but something nagged at the back of his mind. He had studied the images of these humans more carefully than the others. Their eyes bothered him. They had the forward-facing eyes of a predator, not the side-mounted eyes of prey. It was a small detail, probably meaningless, but had survived as long as he had by paying attention to small details. He dismissed the thought. Eyes meant nothing without claws. Teeth meant nothing without venom. These humans were soft and weak, and they would learn their place in the galaxy soon enough. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel on the edge of the New Montana system. Ordered his ships to approach slowly, broadcasting the traditional hunting calls of the apex conclave. These were sounds designed to terrify, to freeze prey in place, to announce that death was coming and resistance was pointless. Every species they had ever encountered had responded to these calls with panic and submission. The human colony did not respond at all. There were no panic transmissions, no pleas for mercy, no attempts to flee. The colony simply went quiet as if it had never existed. Reported that the human ships in orbit were moving but not fleeing. They were positioning themselves between the colony and the approaching fleet. It was a defensive formation, the kind that competitor species sometimes attempted. It never worked, but at least it showed spirit. Ordered the attack. His warships surged forward, weapons charging, hunting cries blasting across every frequency. The human ships opened fire and watched with mild surprise as their weapons struck his shields with more force than expected. Still, they were hopelessly outmatched. Within minutes, the human ships were debris, and the fleet was descending toward the planet's surface. The hunters were ready. 200 of the finest killers in the galaxy checked their weapons and prepared to claim their prey, would lead them personally. He wanted to see these humans up close, to understand what kind of creature could look so much like prey yet have the eyes of a predator. They descended through the atmosphere of New Montana, and Commander Vex took his first step onto human soil. The streets were empty. The buildings were silent. The prey had gone to ground, hiding like all prey eventually did. He smiled, his fangs glistening in the alien sunlight. The hunt had begun. Captain Lisa Grant had been a Marine for 20 years before she took command of the New Montana Defense Force. She had fought in border conflicts, suppressed pirate raids, and trained soldiers on 6 different worlds. Nothing in her experience had prepared her for first contact with an alien species, but when the strange ships appeared on the long-range sensors, she did not hesitate. Doctor was the first to detect the incoming fleet. The colony had been studying unusual radiation patterns when her equipment picked up the alien transmissions. The sounds that came through the speakers made her blood run cold. They were hunting calls, primal and terrifying, designed to trigger fear in any creature that heard them. Ran to the command center and showed Captain Grant what she had found. Grant listened to the alien broadcasts for exactly 30 seconds before she made her decision. She ordered Deputy Cole Harrison to begin immediate evacuation of all civilians to the underground mining tunnels. The colony had been built on top of an extensive mining network, and those tunnels would provide shelter and tactical advantages. Grant had always believed in preparing for the worst, and today the worst had arrived. The evacuation took less than 2 hours. 12,000 colonists moved through the streets in organized lines, carrying only what they could hold. Children clutched their parents, elderly citizens helped each other down the tunnel stairs, and through it all the defense force maintained order. Grant watched from the command center as the last civilians disappeared underground, then she turned to her soldiers. They numbered 187. Most were former military like herself, men and women who had come to New Montana seeking quiet lives but had never forgotten their training. Grant looked at their faces and saw fear, but she also saw determination. These were not soldiers who would run. These were soldiers who would fight. She explained her plan quickly. The aliens expected prey behavior. They expected panic, surrender, and easy kills. Grant intended to give them something different. The defense force would use the colony itself as a weapon. Every building would be a trap. Every street would be a kill zone. The aliens had superior numbers and technology, but humans had been fighting wars against superior forces for their entire history. This was what they were built for. The alien descended through the clouds just as the sun was setting. Grant watched through her scope as the massive creatures emerged onto the streets of New Montana. They were terrifying to look at, 7 feet tall with dark scales and claws that could tear through metal. They moved with the confidence of apex predators, spreading out in hunting formations as if they were chasing animals across an open plain. The first squad of aliens entered a residential building on the eastern edge of town. Grant had positioned explosives there 3 hours earlier. When the aliens reached the second floor, Harrison triggered the detonation remotely. The building collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris, and 3 alien hunters died without ever seeing their enemy. For a moment, nothing happened. The aliens outside the building simply stopped and stared at the rubble. Grant imagined they had never seen prey fight back before. They had no framework for understanding what had just happened. Then the screaming started. Not human screaming, but alien howls of rage and confusion. The hunters charged toward the collapsed building, and Grant gave the order to open fire. Her soldiers emerged from their concealed positions and poured bullets into the alien formation. More aliens fell, green blood splashing across the dusty streets. The battle for New Montana had begun. Grant moved through the tunnel network, directing her forces through radio communication. She had divided her soldiers into small teams, each responsible for a different sector of the colony. They would strike, kill, and disappear before the aliens could respond. It was guerrilla warfare, the kind humans had perfected over thousands of years of fighting each other. Deputy Harrison led a team that ambushed an alien squad near the water treatment plant. They killed 5 hunters and lost only 1 soldier before retreating into the tunnels. Sergeant Maria Santos rigged the colony power station to explode when the aliens tried to take it, eliminating an entire hunting party. All across New Montana, humans were turning the hunt into a slaughter. But the aliens adapted faster than Grant had hoped. Their commander, the largest of the creatures, began directing his forces with greater caution. The hunters stopped charging into buildings and started using scanning equipment to detect traps. They brought in heavier weapons and began demolishing structures from a distance. The easy kills were over. Grant received reports of casualties. Private Danny was captured during a failed ambush near the spaceport. 2 soldiers died defending a tunnel entrance on the northern perimeter. A team was cut off and surrounded near the hospital, fighting to the last bullet before being overrun. The defense force was being ground down. They had killed perhaps 40 aliens, an incredible number given the circumstances, but they had lost 20 of their own. At this rate, the battle would end with the complete destruction of human resistance. Grant made her way to an observation post on the edge of the colony. Through her scope, she could see the alien commander standing in the central square, surrounded by his elite guards. He was studying a captured human weapon, turning it over in his clawed hands with obvious curiosity. He no longer looked confident. He looked puzzled. Crawled up beside Grant with news. The distress signal had reached Earth Command. A battle fleet was already on its way, but it would take at least 18 hours to arrive. They needed to hold until then. 18 hours. Grant looked at her remaining soldiers, exhausted and wounded but still fighting. 18 hours against creatures that had conquered 100 worlds. It seemed impossible. But Grant had learned something during this battle. The aliens were not invincible. They could be hurt. They could be killed. And most importantly, they could be confused. They had come expecting easy prey, and they had found something their entire worldview could not explain. Prey was not supposed to fight back. Prey was not supposed to kill hunters. Prey was not supposed to set traps and plan ambushes and refuse to surrender. Grant smiled grimly. These aliens had made a terrible mistake. They had looked at humans and seen soft skin and blunt teeth. They had seen small bodies and slow legs. They had seen everything that made humans look weak. They had not seen what was inside. Grant ordered her forces to fall back to the secondary defensive positions. They would hold the tunnel network, strike when opportunities appeared, and survive until help arrived. The aliens wanted a hunt, but they were about to learn that humans were not prey. Humans were the most dangerous predators Earth had ever produced. They had just been hiding it well. Commander Vex had never experienced confusion like this before. He stood in the interrogation chamber of his flagship, staring at the human prisoner strapped to the table, and nothing made sense. The prisoner was called Danny. He was young, perhaps 20 human years, with dark hair and eyes that showed no fear. He had been captured during a failed ambush, wounded in the leg and unable to retreat with his companions. By all logic, he should have been broken within minutes. Every prey species had ever encountered crumbled under interrogation. Pain and fear were universal tools, and the had mastered them both. But Danny would not break. Had started with simple pain techniques, the kind that made most creatures beg for mercy. The human had gritted his teeth and said nothing. He had escalated to more severe methods, the kind that left permanent damage. The human had laughed. Laughed. Leaned close to the prisoner and demanded to know why he was laughing. The human looked up at him with those strange, forward-facing eyes and spoke in a voice that was steady despite everything. Danny told that humans had invented torture thousands of years ago. They had perfected it against each other, refined it through centuries of wars and conflicts. The things was doing were crude and amateur by human standards. If he wanted to truly hurt a human, he would need to try much harder. Stepped back from the table. Something cold was forming in his chest, something he had never felt before. He ordered his science team to begin a full biological analysis of the prisoner. He needed to understand what these creatures really were. The results came back within hours, and they changed everything. The lead scientist, unnamed, presented the findings with obvious disbelief in his voice. Humans were not prey. They had never been prey. Their entire evolutionary history was a story of violence and survival against impossible odds. Explained that humans were persistent hunters. Their ancestors had chased prey across open plains for hours, sometimes days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. No other species on their planet could match their endurance. They were built to keep going long after other creatures gave up. But that was only the beginning. Human bone structure showed signs of constant stress and recovery, indicating they evolved under conditions of regular physical trauma. Their muscle attachment points were optimized for throwing and striking, perfect for combat. Their adrenaline response did not just trigger flight instinct like in most prey species. It enhanced their strength, speed, and aggression. When threatened, humans became more dangerous, not less. And then revealed the most disturbing discovery of all. Humans had no natural predators on there. For hundreds of thousands of years, the primary threat to human survival had been other humans. They had been hunting, killing, and warring against their own species since before they could write or build cities. Every weapon they possessed, every tactic they employed, every strategy they conceived had been designed specifically to kill other humans. The creatures attacking, hunters were not prey defending themselves. They were predators attacking rivals. Returned to the interrogation chamber and looked at Danny with new eyes. The human was still strapped to the table, still bleeding from a dozen wounds, but he was smiling. He knew exactly what was realizing. Danny spoke again. He told that his species had made a mistake. They had looked at humans and seen weak bodies, so they assumed weak spirits, but human bodies were just vessels. Inside those soft shells were minds that had been shaped by millions of years of struggle, competition, and survival. Humans did not know how to give up. They had forgotten how to surrender. When pushed, they pushed back harder. When hurt, they got angry. When threatened with extinction, they became the most dangerous things in the universe. Asked what the human wanted. Danny's answer was simple. He wanted to leave, to take his fleet and go back to wherever he came from. Because if he stayed, every single one of his hunters would die. Not because humans were stronger or faster or better armed, but because humans would never stop fighting. They would fight until they won or until there was nothing left to fight with. And even then, they would find something. The commander left the interrogation chamber and walked to the bridge of his flagship. Below him, on the surface of New Montana, his hunters were being killed one by one. They controlled the surface, but they could not hold it. Every time they established a position, the humans attacked from underground. Every time they sent a squad into the tunnels, the humans collapsed the passages on top of them. It was not a battle anymore. It was a nightmare. His second-in-command approached with new casualty reports. 63 hunters dead. Another 30 wounded too severely to continue fighting. The humans had lost fewer than 40 defenders, and they were still fighting with the same ferocity as when the battle began. Asked if they should request reinforcements from Prime. Shook his head. Reinforcements would not help. They could bring 1,000 hunters to this world and the humans would still resist. They would hide in their tunnels and strike from the shadows and die one by one while taking hunters with them. Victory was possible, but the cost would be staggering. And then the communications officer interrupted with urgent news. Human ships had been detected entering the system. Not the small defensive vessels they had destroyed earlier, but warships. A full battle fleet, led by a carrier called the Defiance. Felt that cold sensation in his chest again. He recognized it now. It was fear. The hunters had become the hunted. Admiral Frank Torres stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the alien fleet scramble into defensive formation. He had been a naval officer for 35 years, and he had seen many enemies in that time. Pirates, rebels, hostile colonial forces. None of them had ever made him angry the way these aliens did. The distress call from New Montana had reached Earth Command 18 hours ago. Torres had been preparing for a routine patrol when the orders came through. Alien invasion. Civilian population under attack. All available forces to respond immediately. He had pushed his fleet to maximum speed, burning fuel reserves and straining engines, because he understood what was happening on that colony. Now he was here, and the aliens were going to pay. Torres studied the tactical display. The alien ships were larger than his own, with heavier armor and more powerful weapons. A straightforward engagement would be costly, but Torres had not survived 3 decades of space combat by fighting straightforward engagements. He opened a communication channel to the alien flagship and spoke clearly. His message was simple: surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded or be destroyed. There would be no negotiation. There would be no retreat. The humans had come to fight, and they would not leave until the battle was over. The alien response was a barrage of weapons fire. Torres smiled grimly. He had expected nothing less. The Battle of New Montana began in the darkness between worlds. Alien warships surged forward, their weapons lighting up the void with streams of energy and projectiles. Human ships responded in kind, but they did not charge headlong into the enemy formation. Instead, they split into smaller groups and began circling the alien fleet like wolves around a wounded animal. Torres understood something the aliens did not. Human ships were designed to fight other human ships, and humans had been killing each other for a very long time. Every weapon system, every tactical doctrine, every defensive measure had been refined through centuries of warfare. The aliens had been hunting prey species that could not fight back. They had no experience against an enemy that knew how to wage war. The first alien warship died within minutes of the battle starting. A human destroyer group targeted its engines with coordinated fire, crippling its mobility. Then the cruiser Vengeance closed in and unloaded its full arsenal into the damaged vessel. The alien ship exploded in a bloom of fire and debris, and Torres ordered his fleet to select the next target. On the surface of New Montana, Sergeant Maria Santos received word that the fleet had arrived. She gathered her remaining Marines and prepared for the next phase of the operation. The aliens on the ground were now cut off from orbital support. They were trapped, and trapped enemies were dangerous but also vulnerable. Santos led her team through the tunnel network toward the alien command position. Captain Grant was wounded and resting in the medical shelter, so Santos had assumed field command. She had 17 Marines left, all of them exhausted and running low on ammunition. It did not matter. They had a job to do. The aliens had established their headquarters in the colony administration building. Santos studied the structure through her scope and counted the guards. 12 hunters in visible positions, probably more inside. Heavy weapons on the roof. Barricades on all approaches. It would be a difficult assault. Private crawled up beside her and asked for orders. Santos considered their options. A frontal attack would get them all killed. They needed another way. She found it in the colony maintenance records. A service tunnel ran beneath the administration building, originally used for power and water lines. The aliens probably did not know it existed. Santos led her team through the darkness, moving silently beneath enemy feet until they reached the access point directly under the building. They emerged in the basement storage area. 2 alien hunters were standing guard, and Santos killed them both with her combat knife before they could raise an alarm. Her Marines spread out through the lower level, eliminating guards with quiet efficiency. By the time the aliens realized they were under attack, Santos was already on the main floor. The fighting was brutal and close. Marines and aliens struggled in the narrow hallways, too close for proper aim, resorting to bayonets and claws and bare hands. Santos took a wound across her shoulder but kept fighting. She had lost too many friends today to stop now. In orbit, the alien fleet was being systematically destroyed. Torres watched another enemy warship break apart under concentrated fire and checked the tactical display. 3 alien vessels remained, all of them damaged. The flagship was trying to flee, its engines straining to reach faster than light speed. Torres ordered the pursuit group to intercept. The destroyer Carson and her escort ships accelerated toward the fleeing flagship, cutting off its escape route. The alien commander had 2 choices now: stand and fight or surrender. There was no running from this battle. On the surface, Santos and her Marines reached the command center of the administration building. Commander was there, surrounded by his elite guards. He was larger than any alien Santos had seen, his scales darker and his fangs longer. He looked at the humans with an expression she recognized. It was fear. The fight lasted less than a minute. Guards were skilled, but they were not prepared for the ferocity of human close combat. Marines died, but aliens died faster. When it was over, Santos stood over the wounded alien commander with her rifle aimed at his head. Spoken broken human language, he asked if she was going to kill him. Santos considered the question. Part of her wanted to pull the trigger. This creature had invaded her colony, killed her friends, and treated her people like animals to be hunted. He deserved death. But Santos was a soldier, not an executioner. She lowered her rifle and told that he would live. He would stand trial for his crimes. He would answer for what he had done. And he would tell his masters what happened here. He would tell them what humans really were. Looked up at the human standing over him and finally understood the truth. His species had ruled the galaxy through fear for 3,000 years. They had hunted every creature they encountered, confident in their superiority. They had finally found something that hunted back. 6 months had passed since the Battle of New Montana, and the galaxy had changed forever. Commander Vex stood in chains before the Great Hall of Prime, the same hall where he had volunteered to lead the hunting fleet against humanity. The bones on the walls seemed to mock him now. Trophies of ancient conquests, reminders of a time when the Apex Conclave feared nothing in the universe. That time was over. High Predator sat on his throne of carved bone and listened to the reports coming from across the galaxy. The news was catastrophic. Word of the defeat at New Montana had spread to every corner of known space. Species that had cowered before the Conclave were rising up. Rebellions had broken out on a dozen worlds. The hunting fleets were being recalled to defend them. The empire built on fear was crumbling because the fear was gone. And at the center of this chaos stood humanity. Ambassador Helen Park arrived at Prime aboard a diplomatic vessel escorted by 4 human warships. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes, nothing like the predators that had dealt with all his life. But watching from his chains, knew better than to underestimate her. He had learned that lesson painfully. Park walked into the Great Hall without guards. She stood before the throne of the High Predator and spoke with a voice that carried clearly through the chamber. She brought a message from Earth and from the United Colonies of Humanity. The message was simple. Humanity offered the Apex Conclave a choice. The first option was peace. Humans would establish diplomatic relations with the Conclave. Trade could begin. Cultural exchange could follow. The hunting of sentient species would end immediately and permanently. In return, humanity would recognize Conclave territory and would not seek expansion into their space. Both species would coexist, different but equal. The second option was war. Humanity would mobilize its full military strength and systematically destroy the Conclave fleet by fleet, world by world, until the predator species were no longer a threat to anyone. This would be costly and bloody, but humans had never shied away from costly and bloody conflicts. They had been waging them against each other since before they discovered fire. Leaned forward on his throne and asked a question that had been burning in his mind since the reports first arrived. How had humans become so dangerous without natural weapons? How had soft, slow, fragile creatures turned themselves into something that could defeat the greatest hunters in the galaxy? Park smiled slightly and answered. Humans had no claws, she said, so they invented knives. Humans had no fangs, so they invented spears. Humans had no venom, so they invented poison. Humans had no armor, so they built it from metal and ceramic and advanced composites. Every natural weapon that the predator species possessed, humans had created artificial versions that were better, sharper, more deadly. But that was only part of the answer. Park continued. The real reason humans were dangerous was not their weapons. It was their minds. Humans had evolved in a world where the greatest threat was always other humans. They had spent their entire existence competing, fighting, and surviving against creatures exactly as intelligent and adaptable as themselves. Every tactic the Conclave used, humans had already seen. Every strategy, every trap, every psychological technique had been tried against humans by other humans for hundreds of thousands of years. The predator species had been practicing against prey. Humans had been practicing against the most dangerous opponent possible, themselves. Was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to and asked for his counsel. The commander who had led the disastrous expedition, who had seen human resistance firsthand, who had been captured and forced to witness the destruction of his fleet. What did he recommend? Spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. He told to accept the peace offer, not because humans were merciful or generous, but because they were practical. They did not want war. War was expensive and destructive and unpredictable. Humans preferred trade and cooperation because those things made everyone stronger. But if the Conclave chose war, continued, then every predator in the galaxy would learn what he had learned on New Montana. Humans did not fight for sport or dominance. They fought for survival, And when humans fought for survival, they did not stop until the threat was completely eliminated. Not defeated, not pushed back, not contained. Eliminated. The Conclave could win battles against humanity. They might even win campaigns, but they could never win the war because humans would never accept defeat. They would keep fighting, keep adapting, keep sacrificing until either they won or there was nothing left of them to fight. And even then, suspected, the last human would find a way to take a few more predators down. That was what made them terrifying, not their weapons or their technology or their tactics, their absolute, unwavering refusal to give up. Considered these words. The Great Hall was silent except for the distant hum of the city outside. 3,000 years of conquest, of dominance, of unchallenged supremacy. And now this small, soft species from an unremarkable world had brought it all crashing down. The High Predator made his decision. The Conclave would accept peace. Park nodded graciously and promised that humanity would honor the agreement. She turned to leave, then paused and addressed the assembled predators one final time. Humanity remembered what it was like to be prey, she said. In their distant past, before they invented fire and weapons and civilization, humans had been hunted by larger, stronger creatures. They had lived in fear, hiding in caves and running from predators. That memory was still inside them, buried deep in their instincts and their nightmares. It was why they had become what they were. They had looked at the universe full of things that wanted to kill them and decided that they would never be prey again. They had clawed their way to the top of their food chain through sheer determination and creativity, and they had kept climbing until there was nothing left above them. The Conclave had ruled through fear. Humanity had been forged by it. Park walked out of the Great Hall and returned to her ship. Behind her, the most powerful predators in the galaxy sat in stunned silence, contemplating a future they had never imagined. 3 months later, Park stood on a very different world. The planet was called Refuge, and it was home to one of the many prey species that the Conclave had oppressed for centuries. They were small, gentle creatures with large eyes and soft fur, utterly harmless and utterly terrified of the predators who had ruled their lives. Park had come to offer them something unprecedented. Humanity was establishing a new alliance, open to any species that wanted protection and partnership. Not dominance, not conquest, but genuine cooperation between equals. Humans would defend their allies against predator aggression, and in return, they asked only for friendship. The leader, an elderly female named Sora, asked why humans would do this. What did they gain from protecting weak species that could offer nothing in return? Park knelt down to meet Sora at eye level and answered honestly. Humans did it because it was right, because they remembered being small and scared and hunted, because they believed that the strong had a duty to protect the weak instead of exploiting them. And because humans knew something the predators had never understood, true strength was not about claws or fangs or weapons. True strength was about choice, the ability to destroy but choosing to protect, the power to dominate but choosing to cooperate. That was what separated humanity from the Conclave. The predators had ruled the galaxy through fear. Humanity would change it through hope. Sora accepted the alliance. Across the galaxy, dozens of other species did the same. And slowly, carefully, the old order began to transform into something new. Commander, still a prisoner but treated with dignity, watched these developments from his cell. He had once believed that humans were prey. He had been wrong in ways he was still discovering. They were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and they had chosen to be kind. That, he realized, was the most frightening thing of all.